Right at the end of '71, Gail and I were building a Challenger, and Buddy came out and said, take the Challenger over to the customer car part and let them finish it over there. Y'all are going to build A-body cars. So they delivered us 2 body in white. Nothing but the shell. There's no parts, pieces, nothing. All you get is the skin and the floor pan. That's it. We had a skin of a car.
Although Chrysler's race bodies aren't really white, it's a term that's used to describe the shell of a vehicle before components like the motor, trim, glass, seats, and electronics are added.
So we built a 6-inch I-beam fixture and mounted the body on it. We welded the rocker panels on legs and mounted them up where we could work under it. Then we mounted the floor to the fixture. Then we cut 143 spot wheels we cut loose in the car and took the entire floor out of the car in one piece, because you had to run the stock floor in the cars back then. We spaced it up 2 inches and welded everything back in. Well, what that essentially did was drop the body down 2 inches closer to the ground, because the floor pan stayed the same distance from the ground.
As it turns out, it's a stroke of genius to attach the floor 2 inches up in the body.
Just simply by lowering it down, getting it closer to the ground to get it out of the wind. Nobody ever figured that out, thank goodness, but we did it. And the car
To gain a competitive edge, modifications to race cars are becoming more and more common. So to keep the stock in stock cars and to make sure everybody's on the level playing field, NHRA makes some changes.
NHRA had said they were going to stop us from messing with these cars. So we didn't want to do anything wrong. We wanted to meet the rules. And they said they were going to measure from the center of the wheel to the tip of the front bumper, center of wheel to center of wheel, center of wheel to the tip of the back bumper. So we lengthened the front fenders 2 inches, moved the front wheels forward 2 inches, cut the car in half and shortened it 2 inches in the back. Moved the back wheels up 2 inches so it met every dimension. Buddy carried the car through Tech at Columbus. I didn't even go over there, I was scared to. And he came back and said, they said that car measured perfect. So I was very appreciative of that. So what we actually done was move the body and everything back over the wheelbase is what it amounted to, which made the car work that much better.
Herb and Gail figure out that every inch counts, and they make the most of what they're allowed to do. Herb gets it that in order to get the most power from the motor to the back tires, he has to minimize the loss of energy from front to back.
Everyone thought the car should twist as they leave the start line. You look at pictures back then, everybody's car had the left front wheel 6 inches higher than the right front wheel. You look at pictures of this car, both wheels are identically the same height. Every piece of this car I welded together myself. We built the cage in the car, and we actually attached the cage to the body of the car. It's attached in little places. We put a strip about a 1/8 inch thick, 2 inch long steel between the roll bar and the body and welded it to the body. So we made the thing like a bridge to tie the car together and make it stiffer. We brought the bars in and tied them to the suspension on the cars. We made this car as stiff as we could possibly make it. This car never twisted, never did anything stupid. And when I let go of the clutch on this car, it left.
While modifying the Demon body handles the big picture, Herb and Gail have a lot more on their minds. It's not just about building the fastest car on the track. It's also about making efficient work processes so that the car is easier to work on week after racing week.
We took this car and moved the frame rails out 1 inch on each side and put an E-body K-member so we'd have more header clearance. Where you look down there, you can see the headers. That gave us 2 inches more. 2 inches is a mile when you're working inside an engine compartment. You see the radiator is much smaller in this car. This is all sealed off because you didn't want air coming through there. It worked like a big parachute. So we sealed all that off and brought the air in under the front bumper up to the radiator. We did away with the master cylinder on this side. Well, in order to take the valve cover off, you had to take the master cylinder off the car. And you had rubber hoses on it, was the only way to do it. So we just took it and turned it around backwards. We extended where the brake pedal pivots, we extended the brake pedal up through the clamshell piece, what I called it, hose it, mounted the master cylinder up here. So when you push the brake pedal down, it was pushing back. And it pushed the push rod into the master cylinder, pushing it the opposite way from what it did up here. The master cylinder is underneath the dash.
Herb and Gail study how to maximize every single part of the car. And just because no one's done it before, that doesn't stop them.
So the NHRA said that we could put rack and pinions on the cars in '72. Well, nobody ever put a rack and pinion on the Chrysler cars. The Pintos and them, they had rack and pinions, we didn't. So we had to take everything loose off the frame on both sides and turn it around because the car was designed to steer behind the K-member. Now we're steering in front of the K-member. Then we put the rack and pinion in the cross member, and we had to cut, lengthen arms, bend arms. We worked on this thing for about 3 weeks. The ideal situation was to have it so as the car went up and down, the front wheels did not move. They stayed perfectly straight. Well, we got it to that point, and Chrysler was afraid we were going to kill ourselves. So they sent down a bunch of engineers, and they bolted all this stuff to the spindles and the steering and turned the wheels and jacked the car up and down and measured everywhere, packed their stuff up and went home. They said, y'all don't need us, you've got this figured out.
With a solid thumbs up from Chrysler's engineering team, Herb feels confident and there's no holding them back now.
The car has fiberglass front end on it, fiberglass trunk lid, and these windshields in this car were special made windshields. They were quite a bit lighter than a standard windshield. Everything on this car, every nut, bolt, part, and piece on this car was either acid dipped, ground on, or drilled. The original bolts that held the stock fenders and stuff on it, the fenders were rifle drilled from the bottom. The bolts in the suspension were rifle drilled from the bottom. The brake drums are all drilled full of holes. The brake shoes were drilled with holes in them. The backing plates were acid dipped and drilled. Upper control arms, lower control arms, cross member, all that was acid dipped to get weight off of it. We acid dipped the bell housing to get weight off of it. We took about 4 or 5 pounds off the bell housing. We put a ladder bar suspension on it. We used a 1-inch 156 wall piece of tubing to build the ladder bars out of. I put them in the lathe, left 3 inches on each end that we could thread and put the heim joints in, and then I cut 100 thousandths off the center part of the tube. We took about 8 pounds off the ladder bars. The body was dipped so thin on this car that we actually took this car to Holman and Moody in Charlotte where they built NASCAR, and they were spraying a foam in the floors of those cars for the heat for the drivers. Well, we got Gerd to spray the foam inside the quarter panels, the doors, and the roof. Because if some 200-pound guy came up and plopped himself against the quarter panels, he would have caved our quarter panel in. They were that thin. The only thing we wanted the quarter panels for was to hold paint. Anything we could do to lighten the car, we did it. I don't care what it was or how much time it took.
Shaving the Demon body weight down gives engine builder Bert Schaffner the space he needs to keep his promise. Now he can use those pounds to pack in more power.
We ran 2 distributors. We ran 2 magnetos with 16 spark plugs. We had 2 plugs to each cylinder. This magneto is driven off the cam and the oil pump drive gear. And then there's a belt in here that drives this one. This was a 1050 carburetor, which is the biggest carburetor available at that time. Instead of being progressive, these carburetors were set up so when you gave it gas, all 8 barrels opened at the same time. We were constantly looking for, a few thousandths, a few hundreds, a few thousandths a second, whatever we could get.
Racing against an almost impossible deadline, Herb and Gale put in monumental hours to get the build done.
There was no 8-hour day. We were there 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. We were usually there until 10, 11 at night. That wasn't unusual. And that was 7 days a week.
What Herb, Gale, and the Sox Martin team do with the Demon in 5 short months is staggering, and it pays off.
We took the 72 car to Columbus, made the first run in it. Never made a run down the track before we got there that day. And the first run I made in the car, I ran Landy and I beat him to the finish line. And Gale had tears in his eyes when I got back to the truck. He was so excited. He was just crying. He was just so happy that car had come out as good as it did.
Beating Landy in a brand new car in Columbus is a special moment for the two men. But what they don't know is the most famous race for the Sox Martin Demon is just around the corner in Englishtown.
We were at Englishtown in 1972, NHRA major event. We were down to 4 cars, and when I heated the tires and did the burnout, the wheelie bar broke. So Buddy and Gale made the decision just to pull the pin out of the other one and let me run it without the wheelie bars. Well, when I did the burnout behind the starting line, the car went straight up in the air and the car went out across the starting line. I pulled second gear with it up in the air and brought it down. Well, you weren't allowed to cross the starting line, so Bob Daniels wanted to throw me out. And Buster Couch said no. Buster ran the starting line, so he pointed me to go to the starting line. Well, I went up there and I turned it all it would turn, hoping it would just spin the tires a little bit instead of doing that wheel stand again. So when I left the starting line, it did it again. I think that's one reason there were a lot of pictures of that, because the photographers had figured out what it was going to do. And it went straight up in the air, and I drove through it and set the car down, never even scratched the oil pan. And Jenkins laughed because he said he won the race and I got all the ink.
The Demon sure can't race flying up in the air, so Tom Hoover and the Chrysler engineers waste no time working with Herb to fix the problem and get him back out on the tracks.
The last match race I ran with the 72 car, Buddy had it sold to Jeffrey Jarris, and they actually picked it up at the race at Long Island. I ran a 901 with the car that day against Jenkins. I wanted to go 899 so bad in that car because I wanted to be the first person to do that. But that was absolutely the best driving, best working car I ever sat down in my life.